Hi friends, it's Miss Tribble. I thought I would come on here today and talk about the cause of Winn Dixie. We didn't get to finish it in class, so I thought I could read it to you guys. But first, I'm going to go over what we have kind of already done in class just to give you a good review. My first graders and second graders, you didn't do this with us, but you can still watch and listen. Mostly our third and fourth graders did this, but you are more than welcome to listen. So I hope you can see my screen that says the cause of Winn Dixie. Now, we talked about vocabulary in class. Look at that first one there. It says produce. Remember we talked about produce, that it was fresh fruits and vegetables in the grocery store or like Walmart, Food City, places like that. Our second word was exception. Someone was the exception to the rules. You know, I like all fruits except watermelon. You know, exception was just an exception to the rule, or, you know. Our third word was orphans. Remember, Opal was kind of like an orphan. You know, she didn't have a mom. Her mom left her. And Winn Dixie was kind of like an orphan. He didn't know who his parents were. You know, an orphan, remember, is someone who doesn't have parents, or, you know, they have passed, they have died. Our next word was constellation. Remember we talked about the different constellations in the sky. One was shaped like a lion, one was shaped like a man fighting with a sword. You know, constellation was a group of stars that formed an image or a picture. Our next word was applauded. Applauded, remember, is when you clap if you're at a play or a show. If someone does something really good, you applaud them. And I'm not sure, if you look over here on where it says week 2, the word peculiar, I'm not sure if we got to that word or not, but it means, you know, something that's strange, something that's different. And these next words, hopefully you'll hear them when I read the chapters. We have installment plan, hollered, pathological, and imitated. Sorry. So hopefully I want you to be listening for those words, and maybe we can look them up together as I read the chapters. Now, let's go back and review chapters. I think we did 1 through 6. But chapter 1, do you remember what you predicted the story was going to be about? After we read chapter 1, what was your predictions? What did you think the story was going to be about? And was your prediction right so far? In chapter 2, it says, can you tell me 3 events that happened that made this chapter so exciting? Remember in chapter 1, Winn Dixie, we didn't know Winn Dixie's name at the time, but he was in the store and the manager was running around and he was upset and he wanted to call the pound, and Opal said, no, that's my dog. And why did she name Winn Dixie Winn Dixie? Do you remember? It was because of the store they were in. Yeah. So in chapter 2 is when Opal was taking Winn Dixie home to the preacher. And who was the preacher? The preacher was Opal's dad. Yeah. So she took him home and she said, Dad, I really want to keep this dog. I'll wash him, I'll give him a bath, I'll feed him, I'll take care of him. And remember, she called him unfortunate. And remember, unfortunate meant You know, he had came through a lot of things that were out of his control. And her dad had always told Opal, we have to help the unfortunate. So that's what happened in chapter 2. Now in chapter 3, it says, we talked about how Opal and Winn Dixie were similar and different. Can you help me think of some things on how they were similar and how they were different? They were similar in both that, you know, they didn't have a mom. Winn Dixie didn't know either of his parents. They were kind of alone. They were lonely because they didn't have any friends. You know, Opal had just moved to a new town, things like that. Do you remember how they, maybe some more reasons on how they were alike and how they were different? Maybe you can help me with that. All right, on chapter 4, it asks the point of view. Remember we talked about point of view, was who was telling the story. So do you remember who was telling the story? Was it Winn Dixie or was it Opal? I think it was Opal, right? Because I'm looking at the book right now, and in chapter, let me see if I can find it. Right, okay, so in chapter 3, I think it says, while giving Winn Dixie a bath, she says, I could tell he didn't like it. He looked insulted, and the whole time he didn't show me his teeth or wag his tail once. After he was all washed and dried, I brushed him good. I used my own hairbrush and worked real hard, and all the knots and patches of fur stuck together. So we know from that few sentences that Opal's telling this story. It's coming from her point of view, right? Okay. The other question was, would this story have been different if Winn Dixie told it? How do you think the story would have been different? I think that's really cool to think about, it being told from someone else's point of view. The last one was, what was sympathy? Why can Opal sympathize with Winn Dixie? What is similar about them? Remember, we did compare and contrast. We talked about what was the same between Opal and Winn Dixie, and then what was different. And sympathy we talked about was feelings of pity or sorrow for someone. You felt bad for that person. You know, if they've had bad luck, or, you know, if they're going through something, you have sympathy for them. You know, and Opal understood how it felt to be lonely, and she could sympathize with Winn Dixie's feelings. And Opal sees that Winn Dixie is a lot like her. They both don't know who their mom is. So that's how they were similar. Now, this last chapter, I believe most of us finished chapter 6. What animal did the librarian think Winn Dixie was? Do you remember when Winn Dixie was standing up on the window and looking in? What did the librarian think Winn Dixie was? Do you remember? She thought he was a bear. Remember just this huge furry bear. And we compared and contrasted the two animals. How is a bear different than a dog, and how are they similar? And we talked about different characteristics of both animals. And at the end of chapter 6, the librarian was going to tell Opal about her bear story. So that's kind of where we ended. And I'm going to read you chapter 7, maybe chapter 8. Yeah, I'm going to read chapter 7 and chapter 8. And then the next video, we'll talk a little bit about chapter 7 and 8, and then I'll keep reading more chapters. Okay? Let me see if I can get back. Okay, hi, here I am. Okay, So I have my book, Because of Winn Dixie, and I'm going to read chapters 7 and 8. Okay, so here's chapter 7. It says, back when Florida was wild, when it consisted of nothing but palmetto trees and mosquitoes so big they could fly away with you, Miss Franny Block started in. And I was just a little girl, no bigger than you. My father, Herman W. Block, told me that I could have anything I wanted for my birthday, anything at all. Miss Franny looked around the library. She leaned in real close to me. I don't want to appear prideful, she said, but my daddy was a very rich man. A very rich man. She nodded, and then she leaned back and said, and I was a little girl who loved to read. So I told him, I said, Daddy, I would most certainly love to have a library for my birthday. A small little library would be wonderful. You asked for a whole library? A small one, Miss Franny nodded. I wanted a little house full of nothing but books, and I wanted to share them too. And I got my wish. My father built me this house, the very one we are sitting in right now. And at a very young age, I became a librarian. Who's our librarian at school? Do you remember? It's Miss Steele. Yes, so she is our librarian. What about the bear? I said. Did I mention that Florida was wild in those days? Miss Franny Block said. I think you did. It was wild. There were wild men and wild women and wild animals like bears. Yes, ma'am, that's right. Now, I have to tell you, I was a little Miss Know-it-all. I was a Miss Smarty Pants with my library full of books. Oh, yes, ma'am. I thought I knew the answers to everything. Well, one hot Thursday, I was sitting in my library with all the doors and windows open and my nose stuck in a book, when a shadow crossed the desk. And without looking up, yes, ma'am, without even looking up, I said, is there a book I can help you find? Well, there was no answer. And I thought it might have been a wild man or a wild woman. Scared of all these books and afraid to speak up. But then I became aware of a very peculiar smell, a very strong smell. I raised my eyes slowly, like this. She was reading a book. She raised her eyes slowly to look up. And standing right in front of me was a bear. Yes, ma'am, a very large bear. How big? I asked. Oh, well, said Miss Franny, perhaps 3 times the size of your dog. Then what happened? I asked her. Well, said Miss Franny, I looked at him and he looked at me. He put his big nose up in the air and sniffed as if he was trying to decide if a little Miss Know-it-all librarian was what he was in the mood to eat. And I sat there, and then I thought, well, if this bear intends to eat me, I am not going to let that happen without a fight. No, ma'am. So very slowly and very carefully, I raised up the book I was reading. What book was that? I asked. Why, it was War and Peace, a very large book. I raised it up slowly, and then I aimed it carefully, and I threw it right at the bear. It screamed, be gone! And you know what? No, ma'am, I said. He went. But that is what I will never forget. He took the book with him. Nuh-uh, I said. Yes, ma'am, said Miss Franny. He snatched it up and ran. Did he come back? I asked. No, I never saw him again. Well, the men in town used to tease me about it. They used to say, Miss Franny, we saw that bear of yours out in the woods today. He was reading that book, and he said it was so good, and would it be all right if he kept it for another week? Yes, ma'am. They did tease me about it. She sighed. I imagine I'm the only one left from those days. I imagine I'm the only one that even recalls that bear. All my friends, everyone I knew when I was young, they're all dead and gone. And she sighed again. She looked sad and old and wrinkled. It was the same way I felt sometimes, being friendless in a new town and not having a mama to comfort me. I sighed too. When Dixie raised his head off of his paws and looked back and forth between Miss Franny and me, he sat up and showed Miss Franny his teeth. Well, now, look at that, she said. That dog is smiling at me. It's a talent of his, I told her. It is a fine talent, Miss Franny said. A very fine talent. And she smiled back at Winn Dixie. We could be friends, I said to Miss Franny. I mean, you and me and Winn Dixie. We could all be friends. Miss Franny smiled even bigger. That would be just grand, she said, just grand. And right at that minute, right when the three of us decided to be friends, who should come marching into Herman W. Block Memorial Library but old pinch-faced Amanda Wilkinson. She walked right up to Miss Franny's desk and said, I finished my book and I enjoyed it very much. I would like something even more difficult to read because I am an advanced reader. Yes, dear, I know, said Miss Franny. She got up out of her chair. Amanda pretended like I wasn't there. She stared right past me. Are dogs allowed in this library? She asked Miss Franny as they walked away. Certain ones, said Miss Franny, a select few. And then she turned around and winked at me. I smiled back. I had just made my first friend in Naomi, and nobody was going to mess that up for me, not even old pinch-faced Amanda Wilkinson. So that was only chapter 7. So I will read chapter 8 next, and then we can talk about it, okay? I hope you enjoyed a little bit of Cause of Winn Dixie, and I will see you later.